Heading: A chance encounter in the Galactic Bazaar. The bustling Trell station was a melting pot of alien species, each with their own agendas, desires, and secrets. Among the chaos, a human mercenary named Kale Draven moved with purpose. His rugged appearance, scars tracing his jawline, a patch over his left eye, and a demeanor that screamed, "Don't mess with me," made him stand out even in a crowd of bizarre extraterrestrials. Kale wasn't here for the usual contraband or weapons trade. He was drawn to a small, unassuming stall tucked away in a forgotten corner of the marketplace. Behind the counter stood Lyra Voss, a Zorathian orphan with shimmering, opalescent skin that seemed to shift colors with her emotions. Her elongated, delicate fingers arranged trinkets on the shelf, her movements graceful yet tinged with sadness. Two thin, translucent tendrils extended from her temples, curling slightly as she worked. Her attire was simple, patched together from scraps, a stark contrast to the vibrant, wealthy traders around her. Kale approached the stall, his boots clinking against the metallic floor. "You're here again, human," Lyra said, her voice soft but carrying a melodic undertone. "Most of your kind stick to the weapons quarter." Kale smirked, leaning against the counter. "Your trinkets are more interesting than another plasma rifle." Lyra's lips quirked into a faint smile, revealing teeth that glinted like polished pearls. "You say that every time, yet you never tell me what you do with all these trinkets." "Trade secret," Kale replied, picking up a small, intricately carved figurine. "How much for this one?" "For you? 20 credits. Kale handed over the credits, his fingers brushing against hers. A spark of warmth passed between them, and for a moment, Lyra's opalescent skin shimmered brighter. "Why do you keep coming back, Kale?" she asked, her large, almond-shaped eyes studying him. Kale hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe I enjoy the company." A snort came from behind Lyra as her employer, a bulbous alien named Gorvok, waddled into view. "Don't waste your time, human. Nobody wants to mate with the poor orphan girl. Even her own kind abandoned her." Kale's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Lyra spoke up. "I need to restock the front display, Gorvok." Without waiting for permission, she slipped around the counter and motioned for Kale to follow her. Once they were out of earshot, Kale's expression softened. "You shouldn't let him talk to you like that." Lyra shrugged, arranging small artifacts on a shelf. "He's not wrong. I am an orphan, and no one wants to tie their fate to mine. It's just the way things are." "That doesn't make it right," Kale insisted, helping her place a particularly heavy item on the top shelf. "Where I come from, everyone deserves respect." "And where is that, exactly?" Lyra asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Earth, originally," Kale replied. "But I haven't been back in a long time. The universe is too big to stay in one place." "Must be nice," Lyra said wistfully. "To go wherever you want." "It has its moments," Kale admitted. "But it can get lonely." Their conversation was interrupted by Gorvok's bellowing voice. "Girl! Stop flirting with the customers and get back to work." Lyra sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I should go. I'll be back next cycle," Kale said, tucking the figurine into a pouch on his belt. As he made his way back through the bustling marketplace, Kale couldn't shake the image of Lyra's resigned expression. In a galaxy of wonders and horrors, it was the small injustices that sometimes hit the hardest. Heading: A noble legacy unveiled. The morning after Kale's proposal, the couple found themselves in the quiet solitude of the Starfire's observation deck. The ship hummed softly as it drifted through the void, the stars outside casting a gentle glow over the room. Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor, her opalescent skin shimmering faintly as she traced the contours of the ring on her finger. Kale leaned against the viewport, his arms crossed, watching her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Do you think we're making the right decision?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale pushed off the viewport and knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. Leaving Trell Station? Absolutely. That place was a dead end for you, Lyra. You deserve more than a life of selling trinkets to ungrateful traders. Lyra's tendrils twitched, a sign of her unease. But what if we're walking into something worse? What if the galaxy out there is even crueler than Trell Station? Kale's expression softened. The galaxy can be cruel, yeah. But it can also be beautiful. And no matter what happens, we'll face it together. Before Lyra could respond, the ship's AI, Nova, interrupted with a sharp beep. Incoming transmission from an unidentified vessel. Priority level, high. Kale stood, his demeanor shifting instantly from tender to alert. Patch it through, Nova. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a tall, imposing figure with deep indigo skin and glowing silver eyes. His uniform bore the insignia of the Zorathian High Council, and his presence commanded immediate attention. Kale Draven, the figure said, his voice deep and resonant. I am Commander Valen of the Zorathian High Council. We need to speak with you and your companion. Kale's hand instinctively moved to the blaster at his hip. About what? Valen's gaze shifted to Lyra, and his expression softened ever so slightly. About her true identity. Lyra's breath hitched, and she rose to her feet, her tendrils curling tightly against her temples. What are you talking about? Valen's silver eyes bore into hers. Your name is not Lyra Voss. It is Lyra Vera, the last surviving heir to House Vera, one of the most powerful noble families in the Zorathian Empire. The room seemed to spin as Lyra processed his words. That's impossible. My parents were traitors. They died in a freighter accident when I was a child. Valen shook his head. A cover story, fabricated to protect you. Your parents were not traitors, Lyra. They were Lord and Lady Vera, ambassadors to the Galactic Alliance. They were assassinated 15 years ago in a political coup, and you were hidden away to keep you safe. Kale stepped forward, his voice sharp. If that's true, why are you only revealing this now? Valen's expression darkened. The political climate on Zorathia has been volatile since the coup. The faction responsible for your parents' deaths has maintained control for years. Only now, with their influence waning, have we been able to safely retrieve you. Lyra's knees buckled, and Kale caught her, guiding her to a nearby chair. This is too much, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm just an orphan. I'm not a noble. I'm not, this. Valen's tone softened. You are more than you realize, Lyra. Your parents left behind a legacy, a technology that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. It is encoded in your DNA, accessible only to a true Vera heir. Kale's eyes narrowed. What kind of technology? A shield, Valen explained. One capable of protecting entire star systems from invasion. Your father believed it could bring peace to the galaxy. But in the wrong hands, it could be used as a weapon. Lyra's mind raced, fragments of memories surfacing, a garden with glowing flowers, a woman's gentle voice singing a lullaby, a man's stern but loving face. I remember, she said softly. My father's laboratory. He told me to never let them find it. Valen nodded. Precisely. The faction that killed your parents has been searching for the laboratory for years. They believe you hold the key to its location. Kale's grip on his blaster tightened. And you expect us to just waltz into Zorathia and hand her over to you? No, Valen said firmly. I expect you to help us protect her. The High Council is prepared to offer you both sanctuary and resources to ensure her safety. But time is of the essence. The faction is already closing in. Lyra looked up at Kale, her eyes filled with uncertainty. What do we do? Kale knelt before her, taking her hands in his. This is your call, Lyra. If you want to walk away, we can. But if you want to face this head-on, I'll be right there with you. Lyra's tendrils uncurled slightly, a sign of her resolve. I need to know the truth. About my parents. About who I really am. Kale nodded, then turned to Valen. We're in. But if this is some kind of trap, you'll regret it. Valen's lips curved into a faint smile. Understood. Prepare for immediate departure to Zorathia. I'll send coordinates to your ship. The transmission ended, leaving Kale and Lyra in silence. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air, but amidst the uncertainty, there was a glimmer of hope. The journey to Zorathia. The Starfire made the jump to hyperspace, hurtling toward Zorathia with unprecedented speed. Kale spent the journey preparing for every possible scenario, while Lyra retreated to the ship's medbay to undergo a series of scans. The genetic markers are undeniable, Nova reported, her holographic form flickering beside Lyra. You are, without a doubt, the heir to House Vera. Lyra stared at the holographic display, her reflection superimposed over a detailed genetic map. So it's true, she murmured. All this time, I've been living a lie. Kale entered the medbay, his expression grim. We've got company. A Zorathian cruiser just dropped out of hyperspace behind us. Lyra's tendrils stiffened. The faction? Most likely, Kale said, handing her a compact blaster. Stay close to me. No matter what happens, we're getting through this together. The ambush. The Starfire emerged from hyperspace just outside Zorathia's orbit, only to be met by a barrage of enemy fire. The faction's cruiser, a sleek, menacing vessel, had been lying in wait. Shields at 60%. Nova warned as the ship rocked violently. Kale gripped the controls, his jaw clenched. Hang on. He executed a series of evasive maneuvers, weaving through the enemy's fire with precision. Lyra clung to her seat, her heart pounding as the Starfire narrowly avoided a direct hit. We need to land on Zorathia, Kale said, his eyes locked on the planet below. Once we're on the surface, we can lose them in the terrain. The Starfire descended through Zorathia's atmosphere, its hull glowing red from the friction. The faction's cruiser followed closely, its weapons locked on their position. As they approached the surface, Kale spotted a dense forest near the coordinates Valen had provided. There. We'll set down there. The Starfire touched down in a clearing, its engine sputtering from the damage. Kale and Lyra quickly gathered their gear and exited the ship, disappearing into the forest just as the faction's cruiser landed nearby. Heading, a proposal and a revelation. The next market cycle arrived, and Kale returned to Trell Station as promised. This time, he approached Lyra's stall with a small box tucked securely in his pocket and a plan that had kept him awake during the journey back. You actually came back, Lyra said, her opalescent face lighting up as she spotted him weaving through the crowd. I told you I would, Kale replied, leaning against the counter with practiced ease. He noticed subtle changes in her appearance since his last visit, her skin seemed to shimmer brighter, and her movements carried a newfound confidence. Gorvok said you wouldn't, she admitted, glancing over her shoulder to ensure her employer wasn't within earshot. He says humans never keep their word to aliens. Kale's jaw tightened. Gorvok doesn't know about humans. Lyra's eyes widened at his language, then she broke into a soft laugh that made Kale's chest tighten in an unfamiliar but pleasant way. When's your break? Kale asked. I was hoping we could talk somewhere quieter. Lyra's tendrils twitched slightly, a sign of curiosity Kale had learned to recognize. I can take one now. Gorvok is meeting with suppliers for the next hour. She led him to a small viewing deck on level 3, a circular room with transparent walls that offered a breathtaking panorama of the surrounding star system. I come here sometimes when Gorvok gives me longer breaks, Lyra explained, moving to stand before the vast expanse of space. It reminds me that there's more out there than just this station. Kale joined her, his shoulder nearly touching hers as they gazed at the distant stars. Have you ever thought about leaving? Seeing some of those stars up close? Lyra sighed, her breath fogging the transparent barrier momentarily. Every day. But where would I go? Who would take in an orphan Zorathian with no skills beyond selling trinkets to passing travelers? I would, Kale said simply. Lyra turned to him, her large eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. What? Kale reached into his pocket and withdrew the small box he'd been carrying. I've been doing a lot of thinking since my last visit. About you. About us. About this whole damn galaxy. He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring crafted from a rare metal that shifted colors like an aurora when it caught the light. Where I come from, we have this tradition when we want to spend our lives with someone, Kale explained. Lyra's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in disbelief. But, nobody wants to mate with the poor orphan girl, she whispered, echoing Gorvok's cruel words. Kale took her hand gently in his. I don't want anyone. I want you, Lyra. Tears welled in Lyra's eyes, spilling down her opalescent cheeks. You really chose me? I did, Kale confirmed, slipping the ring onto her finger. Heading, a fight for survival. The ancient Zorathian temple hummed with energy as Lyra stood before the shimmering orb, her fingers still tingling from the contact. The holographic map of the galaxy floated before her, its intricate details a testament to the power she now held. Kale stood at her side, his blaster drawn and his eyes scanning the temple's entrance for any sign of the faction's forces. We need to move, Kale said, his voice low but urgent. They'll be here any second. Lyra's tendrils twitched, a sign of her rising anxiety. I don't even know how to use this thing. What if I mess it up? Kale placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You won't. Your father believed in you, and so do I. But we can't let them take it. If this shield falls into the wrong hands. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were clear. The shield could either bring peace to the galaxy or become a weapon of unimaginable destruction. Lyra took a deep breath, her opalescent skin shimmering with determination. Okay. Let's go. The faction's arrival. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the temple as the faction's soldiers stormed the entrance. Clad in black armor and armed with advanced weaponry, they moved with precision, their glowing red visors scanning the chamber. Spread out, their leader barked, his voice distorted by his helmet. Find the girl and the shield. Kale and Lyra ducked behind a stone pillar, their breaths shallow as they assessed the situation. There's too many of them, Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. We don't have to fight them all, Kale replied, his eyes narrowing as he formulated a plan. We just need to buy enough time to get out of here. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small device, a sonic grenade. When I give the signal, cover your ears and run for the exit. Lyra nodded, her tendrils curling tightly against her temples. Kale activated the grenade and hurled it into the center of the chamber. The device emitted a high-pitched screech, disorienting the soldiers and causing them to clutch their helmets in pain. Now! Kale shouted, grabbing Lyra's hand and pulling her toward the exit. The escape. The temple's corridors were a maze of twisting passages and hidden traps, but Kale's instincts and Lyra's newfound connection to the shield guided them through. As they ran, the temple's defenses activated, sealing off passages and unleashing energy barriers to slow their pursuers. This way. Lyra said, her voice filled with certainty as she led Kale down a narrow passage. The sound of blaster fire echoed behind them, and Kale returned fire, his shots precise and deadly. One by one, the faction's soldiers fell, but more kept coming. We're not going to make it, Lyra panted, her legs burning from the exertion. Yes, we are, Kale said firmly. Just keep moving. They burst into a large chamber filled with ancient Zorathian artifacts. At the far end was a massive stone door, its surface covered in glowing runes. That's our way out, Lyra said, her eyes lighting up. But it's sealed. Kale glanced at the orb in her hands. Can you open it? Lyra hesitated, then nodded. She closed her eyes and focused, her tendrils glowing faintly as she channeled the shield's energy. The runes on the door flared to life, and with a loud groan, the door began to open. The final stand. As the door slowly creaked open, the faction soldiers caught up to them, their weapons trained on Kale and Lyra. Hand over the shield, their leader demanded, stepping forward. And we might let you live. Kale stepped in front of Lyra, his blaster aimed at the leader's chest. Over my dead body. The leader chuckled darkly. That can be arranged. Before he could give the order to fire, Lyra stepped forward, her opalescent skin glowing brighter than ever. You don't understand, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. This shield isn't just a weapon. It's a symbol of hope. And I won't let you take that away. She raised the orb, and a blinding light filled the chamber. The shield's energy surged outward, creating a protective barrier around her and Kale. The faction's weapons were useless against it, their blaster fire dissipating harmlessly against the barrier. What the leader began, but his words were cut off as the shield's energy intensified, forcing the soldiers to retreat. The aftermath. When the light faded, the chamber was empty except for Kale and Lyra. The faction's soldiers were gone, their weapons scattered across the floor. Did we win? Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale smiled, pulling her into a tight embrace. We did. But this isn't over. They'll come after us again. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with determination. Then we'll be ready. Together.